Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Jasper Bark, and we'll be talking about his new book, Harmed and Dangerous. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm a long-time Crystal Lake author. I am the author of the Bark Bites horror series, which is now up to 8 entries in the series. All of them standalones, apart from the Draw You In trilogy, which make up books 4, 5, and 6 of the series. They are an interlinked story. Every other story is a standalone story in the series. It's been described as Horror 2.0, which is horror that's been regened, retooled, and reinvented for a 21st century audience. If you think you've seen everything there is to see in the world of horror, think again. This is horror for the jaded palates who want to see what the rest of the century will be dealing with when we come to talking about the horror genre. Now, you may think that sounds like a very grandiose claim, so I would very much like you to put me to the test. Pick up any one of the books. I can promise you've never read anything quite like any of them.
Yeah.
But
I
they're
def
also very recognizably horror.
yeah, I definitely say go put that to the test. You'll enjoy your read regardless of whether you think it's grandiose or not.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
So give everyone a quick overview of Harmed and Dangerous. What's it about?
Harmed and Dangerous is a Southern Gothic paranormal thriller. It's set in the steamy state of Louisiana. The plot deals with time slips, small town horror, and the investigation into the case of an historic serial killer. It is quite a dark story. It's not necessarily particularly gory, but it does go to some very dark places. And it's also a deeply emotional story. It addresses LGBTQIA themes and also the very personal nature of father-daughter relationships. The plot starts when 17-year-old Kyra Hughes runs away to the town of Yeovil, which is right in the heart of Cajun country in Louisiana. It's an incredibly remote town that's surrounded on all sides by bayous. And the people who live there don't have much truck with the outside world, even like in the 21st century. And people in like the surrounding parishes, like St. Martin's Parish, will tell you if you ask them about Yeovil to stay away because they keep the old ways there. But no one will ever explain specifically what these old ways are. Kyra goes there in search of her birth parents. She's been adopted, and she knows that one of her birth parents, at least, was in Louisiana. But she's a true crime fanatic, and she's also discovered that unfortunately, her birth mother was the final victim of her favorite serial killer, Billy Ray Johnson. As soon as she arrives in Yeovil, she starts having these strange episodes. Her vision completely disappears, and when it returns, she sees the world around her not as it is today, but as it was 15 years ago to the very moment that she's in. Physically, her body is still in the present, but everything she sees is exactly what happened a decade ago to that day. She catches sight of her reflection and she sees her favorite serial killer and the murder of her mother looking back at her. And that's when she realizes she's looking through the eyes of Billy Ray Johnson. Billy Ray Johnson takes control of her body and forces her to walk where he was walking at that time and see what he was seeing as he stalks her birth mother and her 2.5-year-old self. And she realizes she's being forced to watch as he stalks and then potentially murders her birth mother. And there is nothing she can do to stop him because he died by lethal injection 14 years ago. That's the basic conceit of the novel.
Yes, and it's a very good premise, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Especially for fans of serial killers like I am, at least in the true crime sense. So, what were your inspirations for writing the book?
They're kind of twofold. I think what the initial idea came when I was asked by the DC editor Shelley Bond to pitch her ideas for a comic series for DC Comics what line Vertigo, which folded some years back and is just being revived. This was in the first flush of its youth, if you will. And I was throwing out ideas, and I was listening at the time to the song Looking Through Gary Gilmore's Eyes. That sparked the concept and the idea of what about if you were to see through the eyes of a serial killer. So that was kind of like one inspiration. The other inspiration, probably, stories work really, really well if you, as the author, and you must know this yourself, Anita, and I'm sure most of the authors watching this will also know, if you feel like you have some personal investment in the tale, if there's something you want to say about your life or the human condition in general or society at large, and you feel that suddenly this story that you're thinking about becomes the vehicle for those things you want to say, that you really need to get off your chest, that you really want to explore or process. And that came when I realized that this was also a story about father-daughter relationships, because I've raised two young women to adulthood. And for many, many years, particularly when I first conceived this novel, the darker sides of parenthood were one of the themes I explored. I think this novel might be the apotheosis of all that. It might be my final word, but then it's always never a good idea to say things like that, because then your writing comes and bites you in the arse and reminds you that you're absolutely full of shit. So it might not be my final word, but so far it feels like it. It feels like the best statement I've made. So I guess those would be the two inspirations. Those were the things that got me excited sitting down to write it. I was initially going to write it as a graphic novel. That fell through. I told the idea to my daughters when they were quite young teens, and they got really excited by it and pestered me to write it. And although I've published something like 4 or 5 novels and twice as many novellas and short stories in the time I've been working on this for quite a while, it's gone through an inordinate number of drafts, and I've been polishing it and making certain it got to be absolutely right, because this was quite a personal and important project to me. So I hope that answers your question and a few others as well.
Yeah, and I think the more personal projects do take longer because you put more time into it because you want to get it just right.
Yes, and over the course of writing it, I began writing it as a parent of young teens. I'm now a parent of 2 young adults. So there were, as our relationships evolved and adopted, there were many things I realized that the novel should have been addressing, and that I was maturer and more experienced, shall we say, as a parent. So there were other things I could bring into it.
Yeah, I can see that. So tell us a little bit about the main character. What kind of an emotional journey does she go on?
Well, Kyra is quite an emotionally troubled young lady. She was adopted at an early age. She has no recollection of her early life. It's almost as if it's been completely wiped from her mind, and she's dealing with a lot of mental health issues. She has a rage which threatens to take over her life, and is almost uncontrollable, and it causes impulsive behavior. It affects her relationship with those around her, and it affects her academic career at school, as does the fact that she's fascinated with true crime and with serial killers. And sadly, in the somewhat upmarket high school to which she goes to in Chicago, that this raises red flags for them, and she feels very persecuted by the adults in her life, and she has already really bad problems with authority. The emotional journey she goes through is actually learning what the heart of this rage is and where all of these problems come from, including her more extreme behaviors like self-harm that the novel also addresses. And it's a coming of age tale in many, many ways. And it's also, she comes to terms with, accepts and admits to herself her own sexuality and her own sexual feelings. So that's the emotional journey she takes along the way. It's also about the relationships we have with our parents, and the way that we need at once both to leave behind our parents and move away from them and their world, but at the same time also celebrate and embrace all that was important to us from our relationship with them. So she does quite a bit of there's quite a lot of things that she has to face in quite a short space of time, which as an author, I'm sure my character might have felt was unfair at times. But hopefully, it's an extremely important journey, and I would also hope it's one in which many readers can identify with in many different ways.
Yeah, I can see that, and it's a good complex character makes a good character, period, I think, so.
Well, hopefully, yeah, and hopefully she's not the only complex character that will entice and charm the readers, but she's certainly our point of view character throughout.
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, the serial killer figures into the plot of the book, so what sort of research did you do to flesh out that character? Are you a true crime fan, or
Yeah. I guess is the sensible answer. Like everybody else, I get totally fascinated by it. We're horror authors as well as horror fans, and I think, well, I know one of the main reasons that we're fascinated with a genre that looks at the darker side of human nature and the darker side of the universe is because it's a safe place to put all our fears and all our worries. And it's also a way to rehearse survival strategies. And I think, although in the bookshelves, horror is often shelved, usually between manga and science fiction in most bookstores that I've been in the West. I think the majority of horror readers I know are much more likely to, in addition to horror, reading true crime books and crime books. In fact, actually, there's a lot of areas in which all those kind of, shall we say, publishing categories rather than genres blur to a huge degree. So I have read an awful lot about serial killers, but also about the psychology of serial killing, about the both the societal mores that created and brought the serial killer into the fore, particularly in what's called, I think, somewhat ironically, the golden age of serial killers in the 1970s, which was at once a time of deep institutional misogyny on the one hand, and on the other hand, of a great deal of female emancipation, and certainly a lot of gains were made by women in the public sphere with regards to everything from careers to making headway politically. And the backlash of that often is the very violent misogyny which gives birth to a lot of serial killing. That, of course, is a huge, massive overgeneralization, and I'm sure many people could bring cases and ideas that would challenge that. But that's one aspect of serial killing. The other aspect of serial killing is what makes a serial killer, what drives people to have those strange obsessions, what creates and nurtures that. And again, the novel looks at that, and it looks at types of serial killing that you perhaps might not expect. And I can promise you there will be a certain amount of twists and turns, and your idea about the characters involved in this novel in particular will be changed by the time you reach the end.
Yeah, I think the '70s was a lot of it, the serial killers there, I mean, as you said, the points you brought up, but also I think a lot of the media attention sort of shifted and sort of spotlighted these serial killers in the '70s and into the
Yeah,
'80s as well. So I think you heard a lot more about them than you had in past ages in the 1970s as well. Because I mean,
yeah,
all, yeah. So I mean, I'm not sure if there were more serial killers, although there do seem to be a lot of them from the 1970s,
yeah, strangely.
or is that they just got more attention in the 1970s from the media and you heard about them? Because if you actually look at the history, like, because I mean, I personally, I like
Mhm.
the true crime from past ages.
Mm.
There were a lot of serial killers in past ages too. You just didn't
Yeah,
really
huge number.
get a lot of media attention about it. They were sort of just like, oh dear, we'll put them in jail and we'll forget about them sort of attitude back then.
Yeah, and many flew under the radar, and many weren't really identified often until after they were dead.
Mm.
Um, Which is again is another fascinating topic. And there's almost like a subgenre of true crime of people going, "Oh my god, I think my stepdad, stroke dad, was a serial killer, and here's my reasoning." And that goes all the way from the Black Dahlia murders, up to the Zodiac killer.
Yeah, the unsolved cases get a lot of speculation on who
Mm.
did it, all right, yeah. There's some interesting theories out there, all right.
Yeah,
So
well, yeah, and Jack the Ripper being the most
mm,
obvious one. Huge number of theories. We're still not entirely sure who it was, and we may never know.
mm,
And I don't think we'll ever have a definitive answer.
yeah, well, there wasn't a lot of evidence, or at least well-preserved evidence in the Jack the Ripper case because of the nature of policing in those days, so
Mm.
yeah, so there's also a supernatural element to the serial killer story. So why did you want to fuse those two horror elements together?
Um, Whew, that's a good story. A good question. I think it's partly because the walls between subgenres often fall down in my novels, and they tend to flow into each other. And uh, Paranormal and supernatural aspects to a story work best, I think, when they are metaphors or analogies for deeper emotional truths that the characters are dealing with. They're a way to explore the human condition. They're a part of the human condition that is, by its nature, somewhat irrational, and a part of human nature that defies a lot of what we consider to be normal, conventional human behavior. So if you marry that with something like serial killing, it gives you a wider, broader canvas in which to explore some of the darker sides of the human condition, and also some of the darker sides of the themes I was looking at as well, which very much come to the fore by the time we reach the end of the novel.
Sounds cool. So, what's your favorite scene in the book without giving spoilers?
Gosh, um, well, again, I can't really give spoilers. For me, I guess it's scenes that reflect those periods in my life when I've had very particular epiphanies, and epiphanies that have allowed me to address um, a certain amount of pain or an ongoing problem with regards to my character or a mistake I seem to continually be making. And that moment, and sometimes it's something that other people have said to you quite a few times, and you've heard it but never actually properly listened to what they were saying. Um, and you have that epiphany where it suddenly occurs to you, oh my goodness. And it can come at such a deep seated level that it's almost like you are relieved of that burden. It's like I need never make that same mistake again. Oh, what an idiot! But if I stop doing that, if I stop this continual pattern of behavior, none of those things in my life will happen anymore. And I can effectively be freed. And not just that, but I can let go of lots of negative energy. I can start being far more positive and a much better human being to those around me. There are one or two key moments in the novel when the main character does that, and also the main character, Kyra, and her father do that. Throughout the course of the novel, they're wrestling with a disruption in their relationship, a breakdown of communication, particularly as they have had up until this point in the novel a very, very close, very nurturing relationship. Which goes beyond a normal parental relationship. It breaks down, and they have to do some serious soul searching. So those moments when they both individually and together as a father and daughter arrive at addressing those issues were for me some of the most difficult but most important to write in the novel. And those are the moments, that the high points which I was aiming for. So while there is an awful lot of horror involved, there's also it's a horror by its nature is about an emotional state, or at least an emotional reaction. And this is one thing I like about it. This particular novel has a slightly wider emotional palette, and it's those moments when you can allow the horror to actually reach a point of revelation, like perhaps like the best.
Yeah, those deep emotional Emotional scenes are the most satisfying for readers and writers, I think, both.
Yeah, and the early reviewers that and the proofreaders who've written to me kind of like privately and said, you made me cry at the end of this book, have those the ones that meant the most. Obviously, when people say nice things about your work, it's very important, and the advance reviews in advance of publication have been really kind. Yeah, but those readers that wrote to me and said, "This touched me right here. You brought a tear." Those are the comments that I cherish as an author.
Yeah, we all do. So, did you find anything challenging about writing the book? Did a scene or a character give you any trouble?
Yes, yes, because we're talking about having personal investments in your work. One of the most brilliant things about being a writer, I think everyone who writes can understand, is that it allows you to process and work on parts of your own character, things that have happened to you in your life, and emotional knotty issues. I'm looking at the dark side of parenting as well as the light side of parenting, the mistakes and the triumphs that we all make as parents, anyone who's ever raised a child. And I there are areas in the novel where I describe behaviors that have been close to me in my own family, and this is the way that I have portrayed them fictionally, without obviously putting anyone else in any difficult public situation. But obviously, I've had to think about and address the own mistakes that I've made as a father, and yeah, those are really, really difficult because although you're hiding behind a fictional situation and you're hiding behind proxy characters, you are making an admission often as a horror author, if you're being really honest, about the sides of your character which you perhaps aren't particularly proud of, you may be a little bit ashamed of. So that radical honesty that I had to address really to make this a properly effective novel was really difficult. Burying myself in a way, and I don't have much problem being naked in any sense of the word, but that was hard because I was revealing a lot.
Yeah, I can understand that. So, is there a facet of writing fiction that's tricky for you in general?
Um, it's everything is kind of difficult. I
Well,
think
yeah,
it's a funny
I
thing.
can relate to that.
Yeah, you kind of like, I read these. One comment I read an awful lot from writers in puff pieces that they have to do for publicity is, particularly if they're working on a series of some sort, is, oh, I've just got the first 50,000 words done in the last week and I'm having so much fun. And you think, well, you're doing it wrong then, aren't you? Seriously.
Yeah, I have the same reaction. It's like, this is not fun. This is work.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, and weirdly, it's something I feel compelled to do, and it's almost like the I seem to remember as I'm doing, almost as if I've completely forgotten when I'm right in the middle of a project and it's flowing, how much I need to do this to maintain sanity, mental health, and happiness. This is really important to me, and I feel compelled to do it. I can't not do it, but yeah, it's never particularly easy for me. First drafts are the part that I think most seasoned writers begin to hate because it's terrible. It's your worst work on that particular project. But you also know that an incredibly important part of the process is the editing and the rewriting that you're going to have to do. And quite frankly, I don't even know what my novel should have been until I finished the first draft. And then I know all the mistakes I've made in the plot and all the things the characters should have been doing and all the things I should have put in because I've made copious notes as I'm going along. So then I can sit down and write the book I was supposed to have written, even though I've already put like 90 or 100,000 words into it. It's like, so now we have to dismantle this mountain, rebuild it and climb it again. And that won't be the last time that I'll be polishing it and buffing its surface. So I guess that's kind of the hardest thing, it's getting through that first draft.
Yeah, the first draft is always a slog for me too, especially
Yeah.
because I tend to underwrite with the first draft, so I'm always adding things in the editing. So like you, I make all these little notes. It's like stick action scene in here and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's a tip I often give to writers if they're talking about their work. If you get halfway into your novel in the first draft and it suddenly occurs to you you should have been writing in the first person, not the third, or the third person, not the first, I say do not, under any circumstances, go back and start again at the start and rewrite it all again in the first or third person. Take a break, leave a single line space, and then start the novel again from the very next sentence in the way that you mean to go on. If you've suddenly decided that a character is in fact a paraplegic, not an able-bodied person, and they also happen to be a completely different gender, change it in the very next sentence that character appears and write the rest of the novel as if they always were, and then go back in your next draft and rewrite it. So yeah, and interestingly, I underwrite in terms of all the scenes I should have put in and things I realized. But on the other hand, when it comes to the prose, I massively overwrite. And it's almost like I feel my prose is sometimes a bit like when you see those scenes and you have people in a hot air balloon or some sort of or a helicopter, and there's too much ballast, and they're trying to fly over a mountain, but they're weighed down, so they have to kind of start throwing out, all but the kind of the basic kind of like rotocopter or the kind of basket they're sitting in. Everything. I tend to find the same thing with my sentences. They'll start out being 3 or 4 kind of clauses long, and by then there'll be one. So many words I will shed over the course of at least from the second draft to about the 5th. Which is useful because I've added ridiculously large amounts of extra scenes that should have been in the first place.
Yeah, editing's always fun. Throwing things out, throwing things in. And I do editing in the first draft. Like I don't make a separate second draft like a lot of authors do. I have horrified other authors when I tell them this because they cannot fathom my actually just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting.
But it's whatever process works for you. It is the kind of key thing here. Including if you happen to be one of those very strange characters who writes an absolutely word perfect first draft. I mean, if you do, then I'm in awe of you, but stay with it if it works for you. For the rest of us, we have to endlessly rewrite so we don't appear to be as incompetent as we are.
Yeah. So you've written several horror subgenres and novels and novellas and short stories and graphic novels. So do you have a subgenre or a type of format that's your favorite?
I'm not sure that I do. That's like an interesting question. I think there are some subgenres which crop up more than others. I think cosmic horror, but then I'm kind of almost trying to kind of grow something new out of the cosmic horror, almost taking it as like a seedling and thinking, how can I mess with its DNA to grow something slightly different? I almost want to call it Gnostic horror. But certainly that's a theme that runs through a lot of my work and that I go back to and touch upon. It's really just that one genre in and of itself, but that's probably one. Some of my work, well, certainly I want to say early work in some ways, but it's not early work because I had a very long career as a bit of a hack. When I started writing work that was purely under my own name, well, it was always under my own name, but that was more the sort of work I wanted to do. And this was just the very beginning of the extreme horror explosion. So some of my work was very gory. Although, like a lot of writers who kind of, not all writers, but quite a few writers who kind of start out writing quite extreme work, I think it's mellowed. But it is something I'm often asked to do and approached by editors and asked to take part in anthologies because some of my better known work, like Stuck on You, were quite extreme and quite bizarre. So I suppose that's also, it's kind of like a skill that I have as a writer, kind of going there and knowing how far to take it to absolutely repel you, but where to stop. So that's something I can throw in there when it's necessary and I'm not afraid of, but it's not necessarily a genre that I've based my author brand around, as other authors have done very successfully, such as Matt Shaw or Aaron Beauregard.
Mm. Yeah, I have no one particular genre myself. I write in several, and basically the only thing that ties them together is they're all dark and violent.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of why I ended up my first a lot of my first work. I wrote a lot of children's books. I wrote an awful lot of comics and graphic novels, and the first novels that I wrote were in very different genres, from post-apocalyptic to World War II espionage to science fiction and space opera. And I think the difficulty there is people, unless you kind of become known for writing a particular thing, it's hard to develop a following and build up a good readership. So I kind of concentrated on one genre, and the genre that I kind of realized that I read most consistently from a young age was horror, and it was sort of the one genre in which I could explore and look at all the things I wanted to look at, including the fact that I've got a
Mm.
slightly hyperactive, out of control imagination. And so I had to be writing some form of speculative, highly imaginative fiction. And horror kind of fit the bill there. And also, you can, a lot of horror often involves highly imaginative, extremely dark, often situations that would be absurd if they weren't so scary, and often are so scary because they are so absurd, breaking into the everyday. So you can write about the everyday world, but you can also kind of go off on some weird gonzo, totally bizarro angle at the same time and scare people doing so, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, horror is fun like that. I mean, my books, they all have some sort of supernatural or mythological sort of underlying theme to them. So I think readers can pretty much, expect that from my stuff, even though it's different genres. But what's the hardest challenge you've had to overcome in your writing life?
Um, Interestingly, I think it probably came, again, I want to say early on, but probably not that early on in my career. I began life as I began life as in the world of theatre, became a stand-up, and then in order to sort of like start meeting some of the financial responsibilities I was developing in my mid to late 20s, I became a journalist. And effectively, as a journalist, you tend to write what people are paying you for. And when I made the jump into being a full-time author and comics writer, I wrote anything that people were asking me to write, and I became very good, particularly when I was working on other people's franchises, and I worked on franchises as different as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to DreamWorks Empires to writing about Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep and the Arbor animation, and a whole array of other like Saturday morning TV characters, is perfectly mirroring and replicating the voice and the themes and the characters of those works. And that's a particular commercial skill that you develop often as a writer, particularly if you're working with people's franchises. People want to read a book if they're reading about Batman or Judge Dredd or any somebody else's franchise. They want to see that character as they know that character. And then it was actually when some years back, I'd been wrestling with a particularly irritating client for whom I was writing this game script, which was driving me mad. And my wife said, I've never read anything that you've written that I can point to and say, this is 100% something only you could write, and this is only your voice, which was obviously quite a cutting thing to say. It was like, ouch, knife to the heart. But my wife was absolutely 100% totally right, as she often is, but I won't get her to watch this piece of the interview. So she was right as usual, but darling, switch off at this moment. I didn't say that. And this caused me to have like a long, dark night of contemplation and brooding on this. And at her encouragement, I turned down thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to walk away from this project and go, why am I just doing all this hack work? And then start to try and find out what my real voice was. And to do so in your early 40s, I was just turning 40, I think, actually, is a difficult thing to suddenly think, well, what is my voice? if I were to write things down, I could write, what would I write? And obviously I did hit upon my voice, and it's absolutely hideous, and terrible and dark and disturbing. But it is my voice. So that was probably the hardest and the scariest thing to do. And I have don't darling, fingers in ears. I have my wife to thank for this.
Mm. Yes, always listen to your wife. So, what's your favorite aspect of being a writer?
I think it's there's a phrase Stephen King talks about when he talks about staring through the page. I think it's about having somewhere to go and hide and process all of that stuff at a very deep level of contemplation that it's sometimes difficult to do in other professions. I mean, creative professions allow this, and certainly I think the psychoanalytical professions allow you to do this. But we live in a world that's very full of distractions and noise and overt stimulation, which often distracts us from what those deep emotional problems. And writing can give you an outlet to do that. Often you don't really know what it is you're writing about and how that relates to life, sometimes to years after you've written something and it hits you, leaps out so obvious. That's what you were writing about. About 4 years ago, I lost my father, and he had multiple organ failure and was given 48 hours to live. And like the cussed old swine that he is, he lived for another 5 weeks. And I was there at the bedside supporting my mum, watching him die. And occasionally, he's an old thug and a hooligan. And we're quite different in terms of character, but he was lying there at times demanding that I put a pillow over his face, and I had to keep explaining to him that they do autopsies, this will be found out, I can't do this, and he wasn't having anything. And it was very traumatic experience to be there kind of like 12, 14 hours a day watching someone you love, with whom you have a very complex relationship, slowly pass away, by tiny increments and degrees rather. And while I was doing this, in the evening, in the few hours I had before I kind of collapsed into a very troubled sleep, I would write. And I wrote or worked on 2 stories that became part of the anthology that I did with, or the collection that I did with John Nathan and Aaron Beauregard, who I mentioned before, the name of which has just completely escaped me, but never mind. And that went on to win a Splatterpunk award. And so that was almost like an alchemical thing. I took a very difficult moment in my life, in which I went through some very traumatic, difficult periods, and I was able to transmute it into something that would win me acclaim and awards. So that's probably the biggest blessing about being a writer, that you can take that even more than leaden experience. You can take that shit, that crap that the world puts you through, and you can transmute it into something that can have a direct positive effect on other people. So that's probably what I like best about writing.
Yeah, I do that with my poetry a lot. So yeah, I get
Mm.
that. So, who are some of your favorite authors, and is there anything special on your to read list this year?
Oh, the shelves behind me are not even like 100th probably the number of books that I own. So certainly if you throw in ebooks. Some of my favorite, I've got too many. It's really impossible for me, because either I'll start and I'll just talk for like several hours and making this a very boring interview of just me listing names, or I'll freeze up and then remember hundreds of people I should have mentioned. I am reading a lot of Elmore Leonard at the moment, who is one of those writers that I've only just picked up his books, but I've kind of known for at least about 3 or 4 decades that he's a writer I really like, even though I hadn't read anything he'd written. I remember reading, I was about 12 years old, reading an interview with the writer Michael McDowell in Fangoria, and thinking at the time, oh, I really like this author. And then when he became briefly a scriptwriter for television and film, including Beetlejuice, and he was involved with The Nightmare Before Christmas, I would see his name on films and go, oh, that's that author that I really like. And then I was in my very early 40s when it occurred to me, this writer I really liked, I had never read one of his books. So I went, and they were all out of print by that point, so I collected them as paperback originals. This was slightly before paperbacks from hell, so they were all quite cheap and easy to get. And upon reading the first few pages of his book, it was like, I was right. This is one of my favorite authors. I just hadn't read him. Elmore Leonard has been a bit like that. I've known for years that I like Elmore novels, but I've only just gotten around to reading them. And so I'm having a bit of a binge on his novels at the moment. But there are hundreds of other authors. Lisa Tuttle and Tanith Lee are authors whose I'll read just about anything they've written. It's quite handy that there's quite a lot of stuff they've written, and most of it's absolutely excellent. I could go on for hours, but I'll kind of leave it there.
Yeah, I've read a couple of Elmore Leonard books. He's very good. I haven't read any of his westerns. It's mostly his thrillers, his crime stuff that I've read. But yeah,
that's what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah, currently almost finished Freaky Deaky, which apparently was one of his favorite works of his. Yeah, so I've just been burning through that this weekend.
Yeah. So
while I should have been doing things.
Tell us about some of the books you've written.
Well, which books would you like to know about? I already mentioned the Bark Bites horror series. That kind of kicks off with the novel The Final Cut, and goes through Run to Ground. Those are quite violent but very mythopoeic novels. That's followed by Quiet Places, which is quite a cosmic horror novel, but also it's a cosmic folk horror novel. Not particularly violent, but very dark and deeply disturbing. There is the Draw You In trilogy, which is like a big dark conspiracy theory thriller. Somewhat with a tinge of the X-Files, that is also a road trip through the secret history of the United States from its founding to the present day, with a somewhat unique but explanation as to why we here in the West have arrived the place that we've currently arrived at. And it's also a not so secret history of horror comics from the 1950s to the present day, and the way in which they've influenced and affected political events in ways that you would never guess. And there's Death Scalp, which is my most recently released novella, although that originally appeared in a collection first published by Crystal Lake back in 2014, which is a weird Western, unlike any other weird Western you have ever read. And again, please put me to the test, because I promise I can deliver on that claim. And then there's Harmed and Dangerous, which I would hope also opens up even more work and vistas within the Bark Bites horror series.
Yes, and all excellent books. So what is your next project? What do your readers expect from you in the future?
There is a novella that I've been giving away free to subscribers to my mailing list. It's one of 4 free books that you get if you sign up, and maybe I'll send Anita the link and she can put it down below. But that is spun off from the Draw You In trilogy, because the lead character of Draw You In is a comics creator called Linda Corrigan, and Linda's best known series, when the novels start, the trilogy starts, is a Gothic horror called Doom Divine. And I thought it'd be fun to give readers like a little prequel to her series, introducing the characters that she mentions in the novel. And this has been so popular with subscribers to the newsletter that I've given into pressure, and I'm developing it into a novel, potentially a series of novels, which will be written obviously in a collaboration, as was the free novel on my mailing list, with Linda, my character.
Oh, that's
interesting. Have a byline as well.
That's interesting. Kind of like a story within a story thing. Yeah, that's
I,
cool.
yeah, well, yes, and the whole of Draw You In is stories within stories within stories to such a degree that one of the stories within a story actually comes to life and becomes a character in the novel, and also within the Doom Divine series, there's lots of stories within stories.
Yeah, that's
It's a
always
universe set within the universe of the Draw You In series.
yeah, that's always fun. So I think we'll wrap the interview up here. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for being a guest
It's
today.
a pleasure chatting to you as well as ever, Anita. Thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, and that's it for this episode, and bye for now, everybody.